the precinct, there are actually three buildings. The main building being a three-level, multi-level portal frame structure, which has a lot of exposed steelwork in it. So hence rather architectural, and the finishes were obviously important because everything is so visual in the typical century lifestyle sort of clubhouse type structure. Then, yeah, the three buildings, I think Century and the architects are probably better placed to advise what happens in each of them. There's a bridge which links building 3 to building 2, which runs around a little kopje, which was also architectural and just nice to keep a natural feature. And that bridge was quite a difficult one to finalize. So what we did there was we had some 3D scanning, which went and scanned where the kopje was, so we could then take the architectural design and the engineering design and work that around the kopje to connect up to the two buildings. And that was actually pretty much erected and built from the top down. So everything was suspended, and then the civils were done last to suit where the location of the structure was. Also just rather difficult and intricate. Another intricate portion of the site is the lack of access. You've got a river on the one side, a big hole for a swimming pool which sits between building 1, 2, and 3. And on the other side of building 1, there's a big residential block. So it's actually pretty difficult to get in there with small craneage to erect the steelwork. So quite a large crane was required for it.
Okay. Martin, I think I'm going to jump around a little bit and maybe go to the architectural questions and double back to the structural questions. Sure. Just, you know, a question for the architect. What was the brief in terms of the structure from an architectural perspective?
Hi Denise, it's Andri. I haven't had a chance to introduce myself. I am the head of our architect department, and I was responsible for designing this building. So the architectural brief was pretty much, we call it the lifestyle hub. So it needed to fulfill the role of giving the residents a place to where they can do extra recreational activities. And yeah, so we had to design a building that give them a place where they can have a calm, relaxing environment other than that their own residential flats they do live in. So it's an additional facility that we provide for our residents. I can elaborate on the buildings, but I mean, like Martin said, it's 3 buildings, and then we have a lot of facilities in there. Restaurants, a deli, a gym, a spa, open plan workstations where people can work from home in the clubhouse. And then there's function rooms. So it's a lifestyle hub. Over and above your own unit, you have this additional space to use. Pretty much what this building.
Okay, great. So how did steel play a role in achieving your vision for this building, for the complex?
Charles, you can answer that one.
Hi Denise, yes, thanks Andri. Yeah, I think obviously, like you've heard, there were many functions that needed large open spaces. And obviously something that's quite seductive, if that's the correct word to use for the use of steel, is obviously its slenderness ratio. The slenderness ratio that steel has compared to other traditional structural elements is something that we always try to use, obviously, because of it's also double functioning as an aesthetic element as well as a structural element. And also, I think to give a building these multi-faceted functions that's housed in one container, with obviously, like I said, the large spans, steel becomes an element in itself, avoiding to define spaces and making it small spaces in one open space. I hope that answers that kind of question. And obviously, from first sight of the building, and I don't know if you had the opportunity to see the building, you can immediately realize that we've used steel from structurally in signage, in artwork, inside and outside of the building, and also it ties the entire development, I think, to this building as well, where the entire development has a very good use of steel in its entirety.
What are you most proud of on this project as an architect?
Well, this project was definitely a big team. I think what I like the most about this building is how we incorporated the steel into the aesthetic language of this building and how prominent the steel becomes as an aesthetic attribute. And it just gives this building a different identity from what the normal, typical architecture is out there. What I'm most proud of is how we combined the steel and the difficulty, like Martin said earlier, to actually get all of these different types of construction methodologies to work together and end up in a result that we are extremely proud of. The time frame in which this building was also built was very, very small. It was a short time frame, and yeah, so that's pretty much it. The interior spaces also, that double volume when you just enter the building, where the steel portals are so exposed it feels like a moment where you enter the building, you can just breathe a little bit. So the internal spaces is something that really, really makes the building feel a little bit more intricate, and it just gives it a very specific character. Charles, I don't know what you want to add.
Charles, do you have Charles there?
Sorry, I lost the track there a little bit. We were disconnected.
Charles, I've mentioned what was my side of things, why we were proud of the building and the project. So I don't know if you want to add something from your side.
I can maybe just say, I mean, the building speaks for itself, and it's quite difficult to put it in words. As if you actually do wander through the building, something that is quite interesting and special about this building is that there's a continuous line of architectural language that is represented in the steel. And like I said before, you immediately notice in some cases steel very prominently, and in other cases it disappears almost completely, which is something that was very unique, I think, in this building. Having worked with other steel buildings before, I think in this case the whole team achieved very well how the entire building ends up in that continuous language that we intended from the get-go, I think, from the initial brief of the project.
John, do you have any questions or comments so far? We're going to loop back to the structural side of things, but I just thought I'd give you an opportunity to comment or question on anything.
I think just looking at the building, I think the detailing is very good. It's very neat and tidy and concise. It looks like the steelwork was manufactured to a very high standard. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Martin, what were some of the challenges that you had on the project, and how did you overcome them?
I think challenges were varied, from lack of access. I suppose lack of access just means throw a bigger crane at the problem. But it was difficult to try and coordinate and find space for the crane to park. From looking at the photos, you can see it's on a bit of a hill. There's a river at the bottom, and then all the residential blocks around it, plus the swimming pool and the copy and other issues which prevented us from getting close to the building as we would normally want to, or erect the building from within its footprint, which obviously wasn't an option here. So that's the one item. Others, we had to erect it in phases so that we could put up some of the portals close to the river in order to allow different forms of concrete floor slabs, precast slabs, and then later I think they were in situ slabs, to come in so they could get access to get their work done, also based on the program. And that, I think it was very well planned and orchestrated through Century, that we would get access to do what we needed to do. We would need to leave site, the next contractor would come in and do the slabs, and everything was planned and did work out very well. Issues, difficulties, I think there was very good communication from client being Century, architect Century, the engineers, ourselves, the detailers, and I think it did run smoothly. The project management on the job worked very well. So there weren't, I'd say, any headaches. Obviously there were a few construction hiccups and things that happen along the way, which you just take in your stride and sort them out as quickly as you can. one of the other things which is probably an architectural feature on the buildings, the big window boxes which run vertically from the floor all the way up to the eaves and then even wrap around onto the sheeting line. It was a difficult detail because it's massive boxes, and to get those boxes fabricated without distortion, because when you look at it in elevation, it's a flat plate facing you. So it's very difficult to keep those elements true and straight. And I think that if you look at the final product, I think it is a very good, if I can call it a compromise. Nothing's ever perfect when you're talking straight lines with items like that, but I think it did come out very well. Denise, you're muted at the moment.
In terms of the actual fabrication and erection, what would you say is most impressive about that? Or can you give us a little bit more insight into those two processes?
On the manufacturing side, obviously it had to be neat and tidy, all cutouts, welds. The finish of the steel had to be nice because it is something that's very much in your face and visible when you're in the building. And I think that was achieved well. There were some other, not really difficulties or challenges, but things that are a bit different, where we had to cut off the one side of the top flange of a beam in order to get concrete panels in. And in certain places, it wasn't a case of cutting out the top flange throughout the length of the concrete slab, but we'd cut it out in places so you could get a precast slab vertically down into the gap and then slide it along to where it needs to go to. So I think there was a lot of thought that went into it to try and do minimal disruption to the steel that had to be put back in place and welded so that the flange is there for strength and an aesthetic point of view at the end of the day. But there were quite a few little intricacies like that we had to just take in our stride throughout the job.
So I'm Donna-Lee Schroeder. This is Dale Kretzinger. We were the structural engineers on the project. I'd just like to also chime in here and say, these buildings were quite complicated from a point of view that we were incorporating the steel work with load-bearing brickwork, the hollow cast slabs, as well as in-situ concrete. And one of the difficulties from a structural engineering point of view in terms of the steel work was there was a lot of layers, if I can say it like that. We had the main structural steel, which was required for support purposes, but there was also a lot of places where they required window beams and small framing elements and hangers for brickwork that needed to get put in as well. So a lot of those type of intricacies are hidden below all the facades at the moment, but there was a lot of work and a lot of detail from the fabrication, the architects, from ourselves that went into details like that as well. So it was a little bit complicated from that point of view as well.
From a structural engineering side, what would you say is most technically impressive and what are you most proud of?
So for me personally, I really love the composite floor in building 1 that we were able to achieve. The beams ended up being quite nice and slender, as Charles and Andrew asked for. We were able to achieve that using a pre-camber. The contractor on site also did a really good job of getting a really nice off-shutter finish. So that floor, especially from below when you're sitting in the restaurant area, it's what I wrote down here, as I said, it really gives you a wow factor for the building, which is very difficult to see from an engineering drawing specifically. So that was what for me, what I really like on that job.
Good. John, any questions or comments?
So the concrete slab was cast in situ on props and shuttering.
Yes.
It wasn't self-supporting.
No, there was no sheeting, no bond deck, anything like that.
Okay.
Coming back to Martin. Martin, how would you say that this project stands out? How does it demonstrate the benefit of steel? What do the judges need to be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's the sort of building, you wouldn't be able to do it in concrete to get the style and shape that has been achieved within that slenderness ratio. So I think that steel's a necessity for a building of that nature, especially taking into account what Century's requirements are and the architectural requirements. So from that point of view, yes, I think steel is definitely a necessity within a project like it.
Okay, question for the rest of the team. We've heard a little bit from the structural engineers. Andrew, what would you say you are most proud of on this project, and any final comments from your side?
I think watching the tenants occupying the building and using it, you initially design something on a blank piece of paper, and you hope that it's a usable building and people actually can relate to it, and it fulfills the function that you initially had in mind. And seeing how the residents use it, I think we tick those boxes. I also think, like Charles said earlier, it ties in very well with the overall aesthetic that we're currently using in our residential. So I think we've set a benchmark for what these type of buildings needs to look like going forward in our next estates. And I think from my and Charles's side, this is our first project for Century as a team together. So we are proud that this first building really, I think we set a good benchmark for the buildings to come. So that's pretty much it.
Great. Just one question as well from the perspective of using steel. How would you say that steel made it possible to achieve kind of the vision that you had for this project? Why was steel used? I
think it just allowed us to get the slenderness, like Martin said, of the structure. It allowed it to make this building feel light and airy, and the volumes it creates gives you a different internal space, and how you experience that internal double volumes is different from concrete. And I think we actually meshed the two very nicely together, the steel and the concrete, but the steel was still the predominant feature. So from an aesthetic point of view, I think that makes the building special. And the repetitive of the steel details in so many different areas just makes it a harmonious design that just talks together. And that vertical sheeting coming down on the facade, it all starts to layer and become, like I said before, a harmonious final concept, which is drawn through not just in this building, but in our pavilions, which you haven't seen, but it's also steel, and our blocks and all our gatehouses. So the steel is definitely becoming this very, very prominent material that we're using, not just in this, but throughout the estate. And I think without steel, it just won't look the same. It allows you to get the result that we aimed for, this light, airy building, feeling like a float, not heavy bound and earth. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Any final comments from the rest of the team?
The one thing I'd like to say, Denise, I think it's a fantastic functional building, which is neat and it's fun. If you go and see it, you'll get that feeling. It is definitely, there's a lot of energy in those buildings. And the other thing I think which I'd like to commend is that the entire team worked really well together. And in order to achieve a job like this on a relatively tight program, everyone does have to fit in and work nicely together. And this is just proof that it still can be done.
I'd just like to compliment all parties involved. As pointed out by John, the steel connection details, with everything being mostly visible, the level of detail required from the architects, the engineers, and from Martin's detailing team. That coordination was an extremely challenging thing for everyone to achieve correctly, to get to a point that when you walk through the building, majority of the connections are hidden. The ones that are exposed are exceptionally neat. And from my side, my career in construction started with the steelworks company. So once again, having the opportunity 7 years later to be rejoined with steelwork and to build something, utilizing my experience in a new position in a new field, was truly a remarkable experience once again, and further solidifies the enjoyment of the product, the fixability of it, and I don't want to go say as far as leniency, but the wide variety of way you can organize the connections for something that will generally be quite unaesthetic. You can make it a truly beautiful product with the right mindset and the skill set obtained from Charles, Andre, Martin, and Donnelly working together to achieve that singular goal.
Good.
I think the control that we had over the choice of using steel, the control that you have from someone like the detailer, and between us and the structural engineer, almost coordinating every single last detail up to the bolt connection before even anything happened on site, and how it gets delivered on site almost as a Meccano set. I remember as a kid playing with Meccano sets often. These parts being delivered to site marked with a handbook, and everyone on site getting this handbook and starting to create this, I almost want to say, exoskeleton of a building that's in some cases visible and in some cases not, and which also generated a lot of our aesthetic decisions that we had to make on site. As this thing becomes its own monster, if I can call it that, you wanted to expose some of the panels, and the infill was stripped in some cases and added in other cases, and I think that really generated something quite special in the building that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do, I think, if we didn't have the steel, and obviously also the team that allowed us in some cases to make some complicated decisions along the way. But I think ultimately it gave the project the heart that it's got at the moment.
Martin, you said you just did the undercoat or the primer. Who did the final coating there, and what is the sort of life expectancy on that?
From the project team, the paintwork contractor I see here is Cutting Edge. They're a direct contractor to Century.
Okay. So you don't even know what the product was that they used. You just primed the steelwork and that was it.
Yeah, I think it was a primer, universal undercoat, and a glossy enamel. Rodney, do you remember what the spec was there? Charles?
I'm not 100% certain of the spec, but we did outsource it to our painting team on site. It was a Stevenson's product. I can forward you the information.
That's not important.
And reason being, we have a great relationship with him on site. He produces a quality product. He does an exceptional job with paintwork, and to find a good painter in this country is a challenge. And with Martin, the undercoat and everything will be guaranteed with the high quality that he can provide in the workshop. And on site with the in situ work, for lack of a better description, someone with that more preferred skill set, we believe TAS is generally great at putting it on, priming, doing the first coat and undercoat. But with the building that requires the high level of aesthetics we were hoping for, we've not from doubt of TAS or TAS's inability, just from the experience and excellent workmanship we've received from the painter, and probably a little bit of cost.
Yeah, my concern is merely durability. You know, you don't want the thing to start looking ugly 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Pardon, we lost connection there.
I don't have any more questions. I think we're all good from our side. Martin, I will be in touch regarding an actual physical site visit as well. It'll be a very small team, likely myself and Emmanuel, just to come through and have a look at the site. But I will arrange that with you via email.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Right, thanks, Denise.